My sister tried to humiliate me at my wedding by buying a DNA kit for my daughter to prove I was cheating on my husband. My name is Isabella. I'm 38 years old, I work as a marketing consultant. I've been married to Ricardo for 13 years, and we have two beautiful daughters, Sophie, 11 years old, and Giovanna, 7. We live in Belo Horizonte, in a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. Life was good, stable, until the moment my sister's envy decided to destroy everything. My sister's name is Fernanda. She's 2 years older than me, and for as long as we can remember, she's always been our parents' favorite child. The one who could do anything. The one who never made mistakes, or at least, was never held accountable when she did. While I grew up hearing constant criticism, my hair wasn't as beautiful, my grades weren't as high, my clothes weren't as elegant, Fernanda was showered with praise. My parents said it was because she was the oldest daughter, that it was natural. But I knew the truth. It was pure favoritism. Golden child syndrome, mixed with a good dose of neglect regarding the other children's feelings. Ricardo and I met in college. He was studying engineering, I was in marketing. We bumped into each other in the library one rainy day, when he dropped a pile of books right in front of me. His apology was so clumsy and cute that I couldn't help but smile. We started talking, and never stopped. We dated for 4 years. Then he proposed to me on a trip to Gramado, during the snow. When our parents met, Fernanda's reaction was immediate, a veiled coldness, subtle comments. Ricardo was a good man, had a respectable profession. But for Fernanda, he would never be good enough. I would never be worthy enough. I don't know if it was jealousy. Maybe it was envy of the fact that I had found someone who truly loved me while she was in her first failed marriage. Or maybe it was just the toxic nature that had always existed within her, finally finding a target. Either way, from the day I introduced Ricardo to my family, Fernanda started a silent war against me. Against us. At first, it was subtle. Comments about how Ricardo earned less than she expected. Questions about how I would pay a decent mortgage with my salary. Veiled suggestions that maybe I should have married someone of better financial standing. When Sophie was born, Fernanda was there at the hospital, but what she did was compare my delivery to hers, saying I had been weak, that I didn't handle the pain like she had. Sophie was born with blue-gray eyes. Beautiful. Unique. When she got older, her eyes changed to a very light green, almost translucent. Ricardo had dark brown eyes. I had brown eyes too. And that was exactly what Fernanda started to use against me. How funny, she would say, always with that mysterious smile. Green eyes? I didn't see anyone in the family with eyes like that. Or, where did Sophie get that from? How genetically interesting. She said these things in front of everyone. In front of my parents. In front of Ricardo. And Ricardo knew exactly what she was trying to do. He and I talked about it at home. We'd lie in bed, and he'd hold me, saying my sister was envious, that he would never doubt me, that we both knew the truth. But even so, that seed of distrust that Fernanda was planting insisted on taking root. Not because Ricardo doubted me, but because it was exhausting. It was tiring to constantly have to reaffirm the truth when someone is so determined to plant lies. When Giovanna was born, 2 years later, she came out of the womb with my brown eyes. Fernanda was visibly disappointed. She had nothing left to work with. And for a few years, things got quieter. My mother never confronted Fernanda. My father simply ignored the whole subject, as if pretending nothing was happening could make the problem disappear. My aunts saw the comments, but never said anything. It was easier to let Fernanda play her game than to face her wrath. Then came the Christmas 2 years ago. A Christmas that would change everything. My mother always held a big family gathering at her house. Giant tree. Too much food. Presents for everyone. That controlled chaos that is a traditional family Christmas. Everyone's sitting around the sofa when it's time to open presents. Fernanda arrived early that day. She always did this, liked to have quality time with my parents before the rest of the family arrived. I arrived with Ricardo and the girls around 4 in the afternoon, and she was already there, helping my mother organize the presents under the tree. I didn't think anything was strange. Fernanda was always like that, the helpful daughter, the one who helped with things. When everyone was arriving, she disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a shopping bag. Presents, I guessed. When it was time to distribute the presents, Fernanda took control of the situation as if it were an Oscar award ceremony. She made dramatic presentations of each gift. For my mother, a silk robe. For my father, a box of imported cigars. For Ricardo, a genuine leather wallet. For my aunt, an expensive scented candle. And then she turned to Sophie and handed me a box. A specific box. With that smile I had learned to fear. For the little scientist, she said, as Sophie opened it enthusiastically. It was a DNA test kit. One of those kits you buy online, spit in a tube, send by mail, and they analyze your DNA to discover your ancestry and family connections. Sophie loved it. She really is passionate about science. Starting to unravel the mysteries of the universe, as she says. She opened the entire box, read the instructions, got excited about the idea of discovering her genetic heritage. And I felt my stomach turn. Because I knew exactly why Fernanda had bought that present. And Ricardo knew too. I could tell by the way he looked at me over his glasses, that look that said, she really did that. That night, after we left my parents' house, after we put the girls to bed, Ricardo and I stayed up very late in the kitchen drinking tea. She wants to prove that Sophie isn't your daughter, I said, saying out loud what we both already knew. I know, he replied, and there was a hardness in his voice I rarely heard. How do you want us to deal with this? I asked. Ricardo thought for a long time. Then he said something that surprised me. Let her find out the truth in the most humiliating way possible. What do you mean? We let Sophie take the test. Completely open. She sends it for analysis. When it comes back showing I'm the biological father, you show it to your mother, your father, and especially to Fernanda. And you let her feel like an idiot for trying to destroy our marriage with a lie. That made sense. That was perfect, actually. The irony was so sweet I could almost taste it. So that's what we did. Sophie was even more excited when we told her she could take the test, that it was a great educational opportunity. She collected the saliva sample, put everything in the mailbox, and we marked it on the calendar. The results would take 4 to 6 weeks. What we didn't expect was what would happen when they came back. The weeks passed with excruciating slowness. Sophie checked the email inbox practically every day, waiting for the results. Ricardo and I pretended normalcy, but there was a silent tension between us. Not from distrust. There was never real distrust between us. Deep down, but from anticipation. From the desire to finally put an end to it all. Fernanda, meanwhile, had disappeared a bit. Or at least, the malicious comments stopped. It was as if she was waiting too. As if she knew she had triggered a device and now all that was left was to see the explosion. My mother called me a week before the results arrived. She wanted to know how everything was. She asked about Ricardo, about the girls, asked if everything was okay between us. That conversation was so strange, so loaded with implications, that I knew Fernanda had talked to her. Had planted the seeds of doubt there too. Everything's perfect, Mom, I said, and my voice came out colder than I intended. Why are you asking? No special reason, she replied, but there was a lie in that. Just checking. I didn't press. There was no point in discussing it now. Soon everything would be clear. The results arrived on a Tuesday. Sophie was at school. I was working, giving a presentation to a client when my phone vibrated. An email from the lab. The results were available on the online portal. My heart raced. I excused myself from the meeting for a moment, went to the bathroom, and opened the email on my phone with trembling hands. The data was there. Sophie's entire genetic structure. And right at the top, in very clear letters. Biological father confirmed. Ricardo Mendez. Match. 99.9%. I laughed. I really laughed. I felt as if a weight that had been on my shoulders for 2 years, 2 entire years of malicious comments and disgusting insinuations, had finally been lifted. I called Ricardo immediately. It arrived, I said. And he asked, but I could hear the smile in his voice. You're the father. Totally. Officially. Scientifically. He let out a long, satisfied laugh. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. We decided not to tell Sophie yet. Not because of the privacy of the result, she knew we were going to check, but because we wanted the moment of revelation when we would finally show it to Fernanda to be perfect. We talked about how to do it. Ricardo wanted to be dramatic. I mean, why not? Fernanda had made all this effort, spent money on a gift that was basically an emotional Trojan horse. The least we could do was let her have her moment of total exposure. So we planned. And we waited. Because I wasn't just going to send the results by message. No. That deserved to be done in person. At the next Christmas. But before Christmas arrived, something unexpected happened. Fernanda called me one night. This was unusual. We didn't call each other much. Our conversations were typically mediated by our parents, or by the brute force of family destiny. Hi, she said, and her voice sounded strangely small. Hi, I replied cautiously. How are you? Fine. Why? Silence. I could hear her breathing, as if she were gathering courage to say something important. I wanted to talk to you about something, she finally said. Okay, go ahead. Not over the phone. Could you have coffee with me tomorrow? Just us. That was strange. Very strange. But I was curious. And a small part of me, a part I'd rather deny, was hopeful. Maybe Fernanda was finally seeing the situation clearly. Maybe she was about to apologize. We met at a coffee shop near my work. Fernanda arrived with an appearance I rarely saw on her, disheveled hair, no makeup, red eyes. She had been crying. That immediately disarmed me. The Fernanda I knew was always impeccable, always in control. This woman sitting in front of me seemed broken. I did something bad, she said, before we even sat down properly. What? I asked, though I already knew. Fernanda took a deep breath. And then she told me. It wasn't easy for her. She paused constantly, seemed to fight against her own words. But eventually the whole story came out. How she had been obsessively comparing Sophie to Ricardo over the years. How she had started to believe something was wrong. How she had seen photos of Fernanda, Fernanda's daughter, my niece, and become paranoid that maybe she herself was being deceived. I started to suspect Marco, she said, referring to her husband. Because Sophie didn't look like Ricardo, and I thought that maybe Marco was also deceiving me. So you bought that DNA kit for me as a way to investigate your own life? I asked, and I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. I know it was wrong, she said quickly. I know it was horrible and cruel and envious and everything else you want to call it. But I was scared. I was scared that maybe I was being deceived too. So you decided to try to destroy my marriage in the process? No. I never wanted. I didn't think it would be like this. Fernanda had tears in her eyes now. I thought that when the results showed Sophie was yours, that you could just confront him there in front of everyone, and that would solve my paranoia. I had never heard anything so selfish in my entire life. She was literally confessing that she tried to destroy my life because she was afraid that something might be wrong with hers. There's something else, she continued, and her voice dropped to a whisper. My stomach dropped. What? I asked. I found out that Marco really was unfaithful. Several times over years. And when I found out, She couldn't finish the sentence. But it wasn't necessary. I had seen the headline. The results of their DNA test. Wait, you took the test too? I asked. Fernanda nodded miserably. And the results came back. Isabella. Sophia is not Marco's biological daughter. Neither is Lucas. Lucas was Fernanda's youngest son, about 10 years old. Oh my God, I whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I found out when I took the test to confirm I wasn't crazy that there really was something strange happening. And then I had the kids take it too to understand what was going on. And she started crying for real now. They're not Marco's. None of them. All 3 children I raised with him, that I thought were his. They have different DNA. They're half-siblings to each other, Isabella. They're blood siblings to other people. I didn't know what to say. I was so shocked I forgot to breathe for a second. For how long? I asked. He told me it started when Sophia was 3. That it was a one-time thing. Once. A mistake. But then it kept happening. With different people. The truth is we don't know exactly how many children Marco might have out there. The kids share DNA with people who aren't from the family, Isabella. I'm trying to track them down. That put everything into perspective quite quickly. Fernanda's envy, her venomous comments about me and Ricardo, her attempt at destruction, all of this had been a reflection of her paranoia, which had been justified, apparently. But that didn't make it any less wrong. Are you going to tell the kids? I asked. I don't know, Fernanda whispered. How do you tell a 10-year-old child that the man she's called father her whole life isn't really her father? How do you explain that you were with a man who was unfaithful your whole life? I had no answers for that. So I felt this was the moment to be honest. I did the test with Sophie, I said. The results came back. Ricardo is totally her father. Scientifically proven. Fernanda blinked. Then she started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you do when life becomes so absurd that you can't do anything but laugh. Of course they are, she said. Of course Ricardo is Sophie's father. Ricardo always would be. And I tried to destroy your life based on paranoia, and my whole life. I was right to be suspicious. She buried her face in her hands. I ruined everything, Isabella. I ruined my marriage, my life, my relationship with the kids. And it all started because I was jealous of you. Out of envy. Because I couldn't stand the fact that you had found someone who really loved you, while I was stuck in a lying marriage my whole life. I didn't know if I should feel sorry for her or angry. Maybe it was both. What happened next was fast. Fernanda and Marco separated within a few weeks. Marco admitted the infidelity and the biological children. There was an even more complicated paternity test involving the justice system, because apparently there had been issues of child support and custody rights involved. My parents were in shock. My mother cried. My father went into denial for a while, then accepted it. And Fernanda? Well, Fernanda began to disintegrate. Fernanda's divorce wasn't simple. In fact, it was a carnage. Marco, when finally confronted with the whole truth, not just by Fernanda, but by her lawyer, by the DNA evidence, by the records of infidelity she had meticulously documented, simply disappeared from the situation. He didn't contest the separation. Didn't fight for custody. He just left. Left behind a half-paid house, 2 children who called him father, and were now discovering everything had been a lie. Sophia, Fernanda's oldest daughter, was 15 when everything exploded. She found out in the worst possible way, hearing Fernanda and Marco screaming in the kitchen, with words like infidelity, lies, DNA, echoing through the house. A day later, one of her biological half-siblings contacted her on Instagram, a 17-year-old boy that Marco had had with another woman years ago. Lucas, the youngest son, was only 10 years old. He didn't understand much of what was happening, beyond that his father wasn't really his father, and that his whole life had been built on a lie. Fernanda tried to keep up appearances at first. Still went to work. Still tried to get the kids to school. But you can see the moment when a person starts to plummet. It's like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Each day, another piece falling. She started drinking. Nothing dramatic at first, just more wine in the evenings. Then it became wine every day. Then it became wine during the day. She started missing work. Her hair, which had always been so perfectly arranged, became disheveled and lifeless. And then came the money issue. Marco basically disappeared. He didn't pay child support. He didn't have a visible job. According to Fernanda's lawyer, he had cleaned out the joint accounts before disappearing. Fernanda was left alone, supporting 2 children in a house whose mortgage she couldn't pay alone, with a job that was starting to disappear because she couldn't go to work regularly. My parents tried to help. Financially, I mean. But they were getting old too, and didn't have unlimited resources. Fernanda's situation rapidly worsened. It was during all this chaos that she started trying to come back to me. The calls started simple. She'd call to see how I was. If I could talk. If Ricardo had any contacts who could help her find Marco. Then the calls became more desperate. Isabella, I can't pay the gas bill this month, she said one night, crying on the phone. Have you talked to my parents? I asked. I don't want to ask them for more money. They've already done so much. But you and Ricardo earn well, don't you? You could. I didn't know how to respond to that. The vindictive part of me wanted to say no. Wanted to remind her that she tried to destroy my marriage. That she planted seeds of doubt that almost cost me my sanity. That she did it out of pure envy. But Ricardo, when I told him, was kinder. She's in trouble, he said. She made mistakes, but now she's suffering the consequences. If we can help without ruining our own lives, maybe we should. So we helped. We paid the gas bill once. Then we paid the rent when she faced eviction. We bought groceries. It wasn't much, we didn't have unlimited resources, but it was enough to keep her above water. But money wasn't really Fernanda's problem. The problem was that she had lost her identity. She had spent so many years being the perfect daughter, the successful sister, the dedicated wife. And when all those things disappeared, there was nothing underneath. Just an immense void. My parents took the kids sometimes while Fernanda was in a non-functioning state. Sophia and Lucas started going to school with backpacks with clothes for a few days, because nobody knew for sure where they'd be sleeping. That's when things really exploded. My mother showed up at my house on a Saturday night, unannounced. Ricardo was watching soccer. Giovanna was sleeping. Sophie was in her room doing homework. Fernanda is in a bad situation, my mother said, still in her coat. She hadn't even fully entered the house. Terrible. I don't know what to do. What happened? I asked. She tried to hurt herself, my mother whispered. I found her in the kitchen with a knife. She said she wanted to disappear. That the kids would be better off without her. My heart raced. Is everything okay now? I asked. I took the knife from her. Spent the night with her. But Isabella, I can't be there every night. Your father can't handle this. He has heart problems. You need to do something. What do you want me to do? I asked. I don't know. You're her sister. And that's how Fernanda entered psychiatric treatment. The doctor said she was having a severe depressive episode, exacerbated by suicidal ideation. She needed to be hospitalized, at least for a few weeks. The kids went to live with my parents. Sophia, who was 15 and more independent, went to a friend's house. Lucas came with us for a while things stabilized. Having Lucas in our house was strange, because he was a living reminder of everything that had happened. Of him, of Sophia, of that life that had exploded into pieces. But he was also an innocent child who hadn't asked to be in the middle of all this. Sophie, my daughter Sophie, was incredibly kind to him. She helped him with homework, cooked with Giovanna. They watched movies together. And I realized the kids really loved each other. They had grown up together. That didn't change just because the adults had made a mess of life. Fernanda was hospitalized for 6 weeks. When she got out, she was a different person. Calmer, more aware, still broken, but working to rebuild herself. And that's when things really started to get complicated regarding custody of Sophia and Lucas. Because, you see, when Marco simply disappeared, there was no clear custody situation. He and Fernanda hadn't formalized a proper separation agreement. There was just the fact that he had left, and Fernanda had the kids. But then Fernanda was hospitalized, and my parents had the kids legally for several weeks. When Fernanda was discharged, she returned to her empty house, and the kids didn't go with her. Or rather, Lucas went, but Sophia refused. Sophia said she didn't want to be near her mother, that she was angry, that she felt she had been abandoned, that her world had collapsed and Fernanda had let it collapse with it. It was a 15-year-old child refusing to live with her mother. Child Protective Services got involved at some point during this. There were meetings with social workers, wellness assessments. Fernanda's situation was thoroughly examined. My mother, during all this, was having an emotional breakdown too. She loved Sophia and Lucas. She wanted to take care of them. But she also wanted her daughter to recover. She wanted Fernanda to be a good mother again. The problem was that these two things were in conflict. Ricardo started receiving calls from a family lawyer, because apparently there was a legal situation developing. Fernanda wanted the kids to come home, but Sophia didn't want to go back. There were custody issues that needed to be resolved. There were questions about Marco's whereabouts, about child support, about whether the house could continue to be maintained. You know this could become a real court battle? I asked Ricardo one night. I know, he replied. And honestly, I think you should prepare to testify. What do you mean? Because Fernanda might try to make you look like the villain in this story. She might argue that you were involved in convincing the kids to stay away from her, that you're alienating her children from her. Things like that. That was pure paranoia. But it was also possibly true. Fernanda was desperate. Desperate people do wrong things. And that's when everything got really ugly. Fernanda hired a lawyer, a guy named Dalton who had a reputation for being aggressive, unpleasant, and completely unscrupulous when it came to defending his clients. Basically, the type of lawyer you hire when you're desperate and don't have many options. The first thing Dalton did was send a letter to my parents, demanding that Lucas be returned to Fernanda's care immediately and without delay. The letter was worded so threateningly that my father went white when he read it. The second thing he did was file a petition in court, alleging that Fernanda was the appropriate legal guardian of Sophia and Lucas, and that they should be returned to her. He also argued that my parents were unlawfully interfering in the relationship between mother and children. My mother called me crying. Her lawyer wants to take the kids, she said. He's saying we're doing something wrong by letting them stay with us. Do you have a lawyer? I asked. We can't afford a real lawyer, my mother whispered. Your father is sick. Things are tight financially. That's when Ricardo and I made the decision. We would help. We would pay for a lawyer to represent my parents, and by extension, represent the best interests of Sophia and Lucas. The lawyer we hired was a woman named Juliana. She was young, maybe early 40s, but had a brilliant reputation. She was known for being formidable in child custody cases, and for never losing. When Juliana entered the case, the first thing she did was have a long conversation with me. I need to know everything, she said, in her office that smelled of leather and old paper. Everything about Fernanda. Everything about her relationship with the kids. Everything about why they don't want to be with her. Nothing is too small or irrelevant. So I told her. I told her about the malicious comments over the years. I told her about the DNA kit. I told her about Fernanda discovering that Marco had committed infidelity, that the kids weren't biologically his. I told her how she had a mental breakdown, how she tried to hurt herself, how the kids were traumatized. Juliana took notes the entire time, without interruption. When I finished, She leaned back in her chair and looked at me over her reading glasses. Okay, here's the situation, she said. Fernanda has legitimate rights as a mother. Biologically, she is the legal mother of both children. Marco disappeared, so he's basically out of the equation at the moment. What she can argue is that my parents alienated her from the children, that they interfered in the mother-child relationship, and that the children should be in her care. But she tried to kill herself, I protested. That's relevant, Juliana agreed. If she had a severe psychiatric episode, that can be used to question her ability to properly care for the children at this time. But she was treated. She was released from the hospital. Doctors said she's stable. Therefore, legally, she's not considered incapable of being a mother. So what do we do? I asked. We make the case that the children were traumatized by the instability of the home, by Fernanda's actions, and by her behavior that put them at risk. And we get testimony from the children, especially from Sophia. If a 15-year-old child tells the judge she doesn't feel safe with her mother, that carries considerable weight. But there was a problem. Sophia was a fragile teenager who had been through intense emotional trauma. Putting her on the stand in a courtroom, having her testify against her own mother, could harm her even more. Juliana had an alternative solution. She suggested we get a professional evaluation of both children. A child psychologist. Someone who could assess their emotional well-being and their safety in the context of each possible environment. My parents agreed. Juliana arranged everything. Meanwhile, Dalton, Fernanda's lawyer, was building his own case. And he wasn't subtle. He started asking questions about why Ricardo and I had been so involved. If there were other motivations beyond helping. If perhaps we had our own reasons for keeping the children away from Fernanda. He literally suggested that Ricardo and I were trying to kidnap the children. That maybe we wanted to adopt them. That maybe there was abuse involved. He never said it specifically, but implied it in the documents. When I read that, I literally vomited. He's insinuating that you're abusing the children, Ricardo said, reading over my shoulder. His jaw was so tight I thought his teeth would break. Without any reason whatsoever, I said. Without any reason at all, he agreed. But that's how it works. You throw enough mud, and it sticks. Even if it's totally unfounded. Juliana, when she saw the documents, sighed deeply. Dalton is an idiot, she said. But he's an idiot who's desperate. Fernanda must be paying him a fortune for him to be risking his reputation with insinuations like that. What do we do? I asked. We ignore it. We focus on the facts. There's medical documentation of Fernanda being psychiatrically hospitalized. There's your parents' testimony about the events that led to the hospitalization. There's the psychological evaluation of the children. That's what matters. The psychological evaluation was done by a woman named Dr. Mariana. She was kind, but professional. She spent hours with Sophia and Lucas. She was at our house. She was with my parents. She even spoke with Ricardo and me. I want to have a complete understanding of the environment the children are living in, she explained. Not just with Fernanda, but everywhere. When she finished, she had a 50-page report. I wasn't authorized to read all of it. There were privacy issues, but Juliana summarized the main points for me. Lucas, according to Dr. Mariana, was in much better emotional shape under my parents' care than he was when he was with Fernanda. He had shown signs of mild neglect when he was with her, dirty clothes, lack of consistent supervision, emotional instability. With my parents, he was flourishing. He had friends. He had a routine. He felt safe. Sophia was more complicated. At 15, she was processing not just her parents' divorce, but also the discovery that her life was built on a lie. She had anger. She had hurt. But she also had love for her mother, buried very deep under all those negative emotions. What Dr. Mariana determined was that Sophia needed time and space to process all of this. Forcing her back to a home with her mother, especially a home where the mother was still psychologically unstable, would be harmful. The child is in a fragile state, the report said. An abrupt change in her environment, particularly back with a mother who was the catalyst of her trauma, could result in worsening psychological well-being, possible depression, anxiety, or even self-destructive thoughts. When Juliana shared this with me, she also shared a piece of information she had obtained through her own investigation. Fernanda is drinking again, she said. My investigators saw her at bars. She's also having clandestine dates with men she meets online. And she's leaving Lucas alone at home for long periods while she goes out. That's neglect, I whispered. It is, Juliana agreed. And it's exactly what we need. The thing is, Lucas was only 10 years old. The law is quite clear about leaving a 10-year-old child alone for extended periods. It's considered neglect. Juliana filed a motion with the court. The judge, a woman named Judge Brennan, agreed to hear the case. There was a date set for a preliminary hearing. Fernanda panicked when she found out about this. She called my mother and said she wanted to make settlement, that she wanted to work things out without going to court, that she would be willing to agree to supervised visits at first, just to avoid the trial process. My mother told this to Juliana, who told me. It's a good sign, Juliana said. It means Fernanda knows she doesn't have a good case. She's trying to mitigate the damage. So are we done here? I asked hopefully. Not so fast, Juliana replied. We're still going to trial. Because if Fernanda agrees to settlement, she's admitting guilt. She's saying she knows it's not appropriate to be with the children at this time. We want that codified legally. We want a court order that establishes that the children should remain with their grandparents as primary guardians, that Fernanda can have supervised visits, and that before any change, she needs to complete specific programs, therapy, alcohol management, parenting classes. Do you think the judge will agree to all that? I asked. I think so, Juliana replied. Because the facts support it. And because Dalton is building a case on sandy ground. The day of the hearing arrived on a gray and cold Tuesday in February. I woke up with a knot in my stomach that refused to untie. Ricardo hugged me in bed before we got up. Today it will end, he whispered in my hair. Today you finally put a period at the end of the story. I wished I had the confidence he had. But the truth was I was scared. Not of losing, Juliana had made it clear we had a solid case. I was scared because it meant we had to face Fernanda in a courtroom. It meant that everything, absolutely everything, was going to come out in front of a judge. My parents arrived at my house early. My father looked aged by the entire experience. His blood pressure had risen. His hair had more gray now. My mother, on the other hand, had a silent determination. She had protected those children. She was going to keep doing it. Sophia and Lucas went to school normally. Juliana had advised against bringing them to court. There's no need to expose them to more trauma, she had said. We have Dr. Mariana's report. We have the facts. We don't need them to appear. The courthouse was in downtown Belo Horizonte, in a building that had always seemed frightening to me. Cold marble. High echoes. People in formal attire walking with purpose, carrying briefcases containing stories of destroyed lives. We met with Juliana in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was in an impeccable black suit, hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes sharp as glass. Fernanda and her lawyer are already there, she informed us. The judge will have a brief pre-trial session before we start. Nothing dramatic. Just a final attempt to see if we can resolve this without a full hearing. But when we entered the judge's chambers, it became clear that Fernanda wasn't interested in resolution. She was sitting next to Dalton, her lawyer. She looked small. That was the first thing I noticed. My sister had always been someone who occupied space. Even when she was cold to me, even when she was cruel, she had presence. Now she was hunched in her chair as if she wished to disappear. She had lost weight. Her face had lines around the eyes that weren't there before. Her hair had gray roots showing. She looked broken. And for a moment, just one moment, I felt sorry for her. Then she saw me. And her expression changed. It became bitter. Bitter and accusatory. She did this, Fernanda whispered to Dalton, pointing at me. She poisoned the children against me. She always hated me. Dalton put a hand on her arm, whispering something to her. She pulled away from him. Judge Brennan entered. She was a woman in her late 50s, short gray hair, glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. She sat on the bench with a heavy sigh, as if she were already tired of the day. Well, she said, looking at both sides. We're here to resolve the custody issue of Sofia Mendez, 15 years old, and Lucas Mendez, 10 years old. Miss Fernanda, you're represented by Dalton Correa, correct? Yes, Your Honor, Fernanda replied, her voice small. And the defendants are represented by Juliana Santos. Well, before we proceed with the full hearing, I'd like to know if there's any willingness to resolve this through mediation or settlement. My client is open to discussion, Juliana said softly. My client as well, Dalton added quickly. The judge looked at us all. Excellent. Let's take 30 minutes. You can meet in a conference room. See if you can reach an agreement. We went to a small gray room that smelled of old coffee and despair. Juliana, my parents, and I on one side. Fernanda, Dalton, and a social worker on the other side. Apparently she had asked for one to be present, believing it could offer some kind of emotional support. My client would like to propose, Dalton began, that the children return to their mother's care with supervised visits from the grandparents once a week. Juliana laughed. Literally laughed. That's a joke, she said. Your client was psychiatrically hospitalized less than 4 months ago. She's leaving a 10-year-old child alone at home for hours while she goes out. There's documentation of neglect. And you expect a judge to allow her to have primary custody. My client is recovered, Dalton protested. She received treatment. She's the legal mother. Your client was also caught in multiple incidents of child abandonment, Juliana retorted. Your investigator documented at least 6 occasions in the last 2 months where Lucas was left unsupervised for periods of 4 to 8 hours. Fernanda shifted in her chair. I had appointments. You were at bars, Juliana said, and her voice was steel. My investigator has photos. You were also on dates with men you met online on at least 3 occasions, while your 10-year-old son was home alone. I didn't do anything wrong, Fernanda protested, her voice rising. I'm a mother. I have a right to a life. I have a right to find happiness. You have a right to happiness, Juliana agreed. But not at the cost of your children's safety and well-being. And there's a very comprehensive professional report from Dr. Mariana that suggests Lucas is in a much safer and more stable situation with his grandparents. Dr. Mariana is biased, Dalton interjected. She was hired by the defendants. It's natural that she would favor their position. She was hired by a court on the judge's recommendation, Juliana replied calmly. She's a credentialed professional with 20 years of experience. Your client can call their own psychologist if they wish. But they'll say the same thing. The social worker, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Based on my observations, she said carefully, I agree that Lucas is in a more appropriate situation with his grandparents at this time. He's doing well in school. He has a routine. He has consistent supervision. The mother can have supervised visits while she works on her situation. Fernanda started crying. You're all conspiring against me, she whispered. You always conspired. Isabella was always the favorite. I always had to work twice as hard to have half of what she had. And now you're taking my children away from me. That's when my mother stood up. Fernanda, she said, and her voice was harder than I'd ever heard. You're not being punished because Isabella is the favorite. You're being punished because you tried to destroy your sister's marriage based on lies. You bought a DNA kit for a 12-year-old child with the sole purpose of creating drama. You discovered your own husband was cheating on you, and instead of dealing with it like an adult, you collapsed. You tried to hurt yourself. And then you started neglecting your children. Fernanda stared at her with her mouth open. You have no idea what I was going through, she whispered. No, maybe we don't, my mother continued. But you know what? Your children were going through it too. And they depend on you to protect them. Not to abandon them at home while you were at bars. Not to leave them traumatized. You had the opportunity to be a mother. And you failed. Fernanda began to sob. Dalton tried to get her back in the chair. Let's leave this to the judge, Juliana said, gathering her papers. There's no agreement here. We returned to the courtroom. The judge looked at us. Any agreement? She asked. No, Your Honor, Juliana replied. Very well. Let's begin the full hearing. The hearing lasted 3 days. On the first day, Juliana presented all the documentation. Fernanda's psychiatric admission records. The incidents of neglect. The photographs her investigator had taken. Dr. Mariana's complete report. She built a meticulous and undeniable case. Dalton tried to attack the credibility of every source. He suggested the admission records had been falsified. He argued the photographs could have been taken out of context. He questioned Dr. Mariana's qualifications. None of it worked. The judge listened to everything with an increasingly skeptical look. On the second day, Dr. Mariana testified. Juliana guided her through her evaluation process. How she had spoken with the children. How she had assessed their emotional well-being. What her professional recommendation was. In my professional opinion, Dr. Mariana said, the children are in a much safer and more stable situation with their grandparents. Especially Sophia. She's a traumatized teenager who needs time and space to process multiple simultaneous traumatic events. Returning her to a mother who was the primary catalyst of her trauma would be harmful. And Lucas? Juliana asked. Lucas is younger. He's at risk of neglect. With Miss Fernanda, he was being left alone for inappropriate periods. With his grandparents, he has consistent supervision, affection, and stability. That's the situation that best serves his interests. When it was Dalton's turn to ask questions, he was aggressive. Dr. Mariana, you were paid by the defendants in this case, correct? I was hired to provide an impartial professional evaluation, she replied calmly. Impartial? You were hired by one side. Were you necessarily biased to favor that side? No, Dr. Mariana replied. My job is to provide a professional analysis based on evidence. My loyalty is to the best interests of the children, not to any side of the litigation. But if you had determined that the children should be with the mother, you would have already been dismissed by the defendants, correct? Possibly, Dr. Mariana admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that my professional evaluation was based on solid evidence. Dalton didn't score a point. He just seemed irritating. On the third day, my parents testified. My father spoke about finding Fernanda with a knife, about how she had whispered about wanting to disappear, about how the children had arrived at their house frightened and destabilized. My mother gave an even more devastating testimony. She described the months leading up to the hospitalization, how Fernanda was drinking, how she was neglecting the children, how Sophia had started to isolate herself and show signs of depression, how Lucas had started wetting the bed, a sign of extreme stress. As a mother, as a grandmother, as someone who loves my grandchildren deeply, I cannot allow them to return to that situation, my mother testified. I would do it all again. I would open my home. I would take care of them. Because they are innocent children who shouldn't suffer because the adults around them failed. Dalton tried to make my mother seem controlling, as if she were trying to alienate the children from Fernanda for nefarious reasons. But my mother was firm. I'm not alienating anyone, she replied. I'm protecting. There's a difference. And if my daughter were in a safe, stable situation, the children would be with her. But she's not. And I would do anything to keep those babies safe. Then came Fernanda. Juliana questioned her first. Fernanda was dressed conservatively, hair neatly combed, light makeup. She looked almost normal, almost as if nothing had happened. Miss Fernanda, do you admit to having been psychiatrically hospitalized approximately 4 months ago? Juliana began. Yes, Fernanda replied, her voice small. And the reason was that you were having suicidal ideation? Yes. But I received treatment. I'm better now. Are you? Can you describe your current mental state? Fernanda hesitated. I'm angry. But I'm dealing with it. I started therapy. How long ago? A few weeks. And do you think a few weeks of therapy are enough to overcome a severe psychiatric episode that led you to try to hurt yourself? No, Fernanda admitted. But I'm trying. You're also drinking again, Juliana said, and it wasn't a question. Fernanda went pale. How do you know that? Because I have an investigator. And he documented it. Multiple incidents of you at bars over the last month. Some nights until late. While your 10-year-old son was home alone. I was just trying to get out. I was trying to have some fun. While Lucas was home alone, Juliana repeated. Miss Fernanda, you left a child at risk. You left him unattended. That's neglect. I wasn't. Once a week? Twice? My investigator documented this happening at least 6 times in the last month. Fernanda had tears streaming down her face now. I can't do this alone, she whispered. I can't be a mother alone. I'm not strong enough. Maybe not, Juliana agreed, and there was a hardness in her voice. But these children depend on you. You brought them into the world. You made a vow to take care of them. And instead, you abandoned them. You left them traumatized. And when someone finally offered support, you were still drinking, still neglecting. I love my children, Fernanda protested. Loving isn't enough, Juliana replied. Love without action, without responsibility, without sacrifice. That's not love. That's selfishness. When it was Dalton's turn to ask his questions, he tried to paint Fernanda as a victim, as a woman who had gone through terrible trauma, marital betrayal, discovery about the children's paternity, and was just trying to recover. Is it true that you discovered your husband had multiple affairs? He asked. Yes, Fernanda replied. And that was devastating? Yes, very much so. Did you receive any immediate emotional support during that period? No. My family just. They didn't understand. My sister was cold. My parents were in shock. I was alone. But then he made a mistake. A big mistake. In fact, Dalton continued, isn't it true that your sister, Isabella, tried to humiliate you further by revealing that the DNA kit you had given to Isabella's daughter came back, confirming that Ricardo was the father? Juliana stood up immediately. Your Honor, this is hearsay and is irrelevant to the merits of this case. But Judge Brennan raised a hand. Wait, she said. She looked at Dalton. Are you suggesting that Miss Fernanda gave a DNA kit as a gift with the intention of creating marital conflict? No, Your Honor, Dalton replied quickly, realizing he had made a mistake. I was just establishing that there was complicated family dynamics during that period. It seems like you were establishing that your client was involved in intentional behavior to harm a family member, the judge replied, and her voice was cold. Dalton didn't respond. The judge looked at Juliana. Your client, Ms. Isabella, received a DNA kit as a gift from Fernanda? She received a DNA kit as a gift for her daughter, Your Honor, Juliana replied. Based on all the evidence, it was given with the intention of creating doubt about paternity. The judge wrote something in her papers. It wasn't good for Fernanda. When the hearing finally ended, after 3 days of testimonies, arguments, and evidence presentations, the judge leaned back in her chair. This is a difficult case, she began. There are individuals here who genuinely love the children involved. There are also individuals who failed in the duties to which they committed. She looked directly at Fernanda. Miss Fernanda Mendez is the legal mother of Sofia and Lucas Mendez. No one is questioning that. But there's a difference between being a legal mother and being an adequately functional mother. Based on the evidence presented in this court, I have determined the following. Sofia and Lucas Mendez will remain under the primary custody of their grandparents, Maria and Paulo Mendez. Miss Fernanda may have supervised visits twice a month at a neutrally supervised facility for the next 12 months. Fernanda let out a broken sound. Before any change in this arrangement, the judge continued, Miss Fernanda must complete the following programs. Mental therapy with a licensed professional, minimum 1 session per week for 6 months. An alcohol and drug control program with random composition testing and certified parenting classes. Your Honor, Dalton tried to interrupt. I'm not finished yet, the judge replied. Miss Fernanda will also be required to maintain regular contact with an assigned social worker. She will be monitored for any incidents of neglect, abuse, or behavior that puts the children at risk. If after 12 months, Miss Fernanda has completed these programs, if professional reports indicate significant improvement in her mental health and stability, and if the children express a desire to increase visitation time, we can revisit this arrangement. But let it be clear, the best interests of the children are what matters. Not the mother's wishes. Not the extended family's motivations. The children. They are the focus. Gavel down. And that's how it ended. Leaving the courthouse, Fernanda completely disintegrated. She started screaming. She said the court was unfair, that everyone was conspiring against her, that she had been robbed of her children. Dalton tried to calm her down. Security guards came. There was a scene. Eventually she was taken away, still screaming. Ricardo hugged me outside the courthouse. It's over, he whispered. It's all over. But the truth was more complicated than that. In the months that followed, Fernanda began to disappear from our lives. She completed the first therapy session, but then stopped. She entered an alcohol control program, but abandoned it after 2 weeks. She said she didn't see the point. That she had been treated unfairly. That she didn't need rehabilitation. She needed someone to finally see that she was the victim. Her supervised visits with Sofia and Lucas were awkward. She would sit there, often in silence, other times trying to make the children feel guilty for not coming home with her. Do you like your grandparents more than me? She would ask Sofia. We can't talk about this now, Sofia would respond, looking at the supervisor. With Lucas, she was different. She tried to spoil him. Bought presents. Tried to buy his love back. Do you want to come home with me soon? She would ask. Lucas always said no. After a few months, Fernanda started missing visits. First 1, then 2. Then she stopped coming completely. The supervisor offered to reschedule. Fernanda didn't respond. My parents, when they told me about this, seemed sad. Not because they were happy that Fernanda had disappeared, they weren't. But because it meant the children had to process the fact that their mother had also abandoned them. Sofia went to therapy. Lucas started asking questions about why his mother didn't want to see him anymore. Because she's having difficulties, my mother explained carefully. But it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. She's just struggling. Months turned into a year. A year turned into almost 2 years since the trial ended. Fernanda literally disappeared. She moved from her house. Her phone number changed. She distanced herself from everyone. My parents received a letter from her a few months after she disappeared. I'm not enough of a mother for them, the letter said. I'm not enough of a sister for you. I'm not enough of a daughter. I'm just not enough. I'm trying to fix myself somewhere away from all of you. Please tell my children I love them. Just not enough to be present. My father cried when he read that. My mother put the letter in a box, away from the children's eyes. Life continued. Sophie turned 15 and a half when everything started to calm down. She was doing better in school. She had friends again. She was rebuilding herself. Lucas turned 11. He still asked about his mother occasionally, but less frequently. His grandparents were his stability. We were his family. Ricardo and I lived our lives. Sophie and Giovanna grew up. We traveled to the beach in the summer. We celebrated birthdays and Christmases. My parents' will was changed. Fernanda was removed as a beneficiary. Her portion was divided between me, my younger brother, and a trust for Sophia and Lucas for when they came of age. When my father died, 3 years after the trial, Fernanda didn't show up at the funeral. When my mother died, 5 years later, Fernanda still hadn't returned. Eventually, Sophia and Lucas had to make their own decisions about their mother. Sophia, at 18, sent an email to the address her mother had left with my parents. It said, "Hello, Mom. It's me, Sophia. You left my life a long time ago. And for a long time, I was furious. But now I'm just sad. Sad that you couldn't be the mother I needed. Sad that you were so consumed by your own pain that you couldn't see mine. But I'm also grateful. Grateful that my grandparents were there. Grateful that my Aunt Isabella and Uncle Ricardo didn't leave me alone. I'd like to know that you're well, somewhere, finally finding the peace you were looking for. But I also need you to know that there's no room for you in my life right now. Maybe someday, but not now." Sophia never received a response. Lucas, at 13, didn't send anything. When I asked if he wanted to try contacting his mother, he just shook his head. "She's not my mother," he said, with the clarity only a child can have. "Grandma Maria is my mother. And as for me, well, there was a certain satisfaction in all of this. It's not revenge, exactly. It wasn't planned that way. But there was a poetic irony in how things unfolded. Fernanda tried to destroy my marriage with a DNA kit. Instead, the DNA kit destroyed hers. She tried to humiliate me with insinuations of infidelity. Instead, it turned out she was the one who had reasons to worry. She tried to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect mother. And when it turned out she wasn't any of those things, she couldn't handle reality. Ricardo often says the universe doesn't always deliver justice the way we expect. But sometimes, if you just stay quiet and let people face the consequences of their own actions, it's almost the same thing. Sophia is now a strong young woman. She's in university studying psychology. She wants to help children who've gone through trauma. Lucas is a well-adjusted teenager who dreams of being an engineer like Ricardo. We are a family. Not perfect, but real. Based on true love, not false expectations or corrosive envy. And as for Fernanda, well, eventually I received news through my parents' old network of friends. She was in Sao Paulo, living alone, working in a cafe. Nobody knew her as Isabella's sister, or the favorite daughter, or the one who had destroyed her own life. She was just Fernanda, just a woman trying to start over. And maybe that's the greatest punishment of all, not the loss of children, not the death of a marriage, but the loss of the identity she had built on layers of envy and lies. Some days I feel sorry for her. Some days I'm still furious. Most days, I'm just grateful it's over. Grateful to have Ricardo. Grateful to have family who supported me. Grateful to have, in the end, survived. And grateful to have learned a lesson I'll never forget. Envy is a poison you drink hoping the other person dies. Fernanda drank it drop by drop, year after year. And she ended up exactly where she deserved to be.